welcome to week 3 of class. I'm glad to have you here. Um, in this week, we're going to focus on learning how to draw on the canvas in Simple GUI. I'll start this lecture off by explaining a little bit about how computers work and how they organize the drawing process. We'll talk a little bit about the kind of coordinate systems you're going to use when you do the drawing. And then we'll just do a really simple, quick application in Simple GUI where we'll open a frame and we'll draw some on the canvas. All right, well, let's go to it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how your computer works when it comes to drawing. So, first thing we start with is what do we see? What do we see on a computer? Well, we have a monitor, and the monitor shows some kind of visual output from what the computer's doing. So, kind of the thing to understand when we have a computer monitor is that what we see on it really corresponds to a 2D grid of pixels. Now you probably actually know about this already because if you've gone out and bought, say, a high-def TV, the salesman's always bragging about, well, we have this TV and it's got 1920 by 1028 resolution. What that really means is what you're seeing on the screen is this kind of grid of millions and millions of little dots. And each of those dots has a color attached to it. So in a computer, this kind of 2D grid of pixels is kind of really stored logically in something called the frame buffer. You don't really have to understand what the frame buffer is, except it's just kind of a data structure that keeps track of the values of the pixels that you see on the screen. So we've kind of got something stored that's what you see on the screen, so how does the computer actually then kind of make things move? Well, it goes through and it redraws the contents of the frame buffer very quickly. So most monitors, let's say computers, then update the monitor based on the frame buffer. So it goes to the frame buffer and says, okay, kind of what color should I draw on a particular pixel? And then do this very quickly at a rate of around 60 to 72 times a second. And in fact, this is what's called the refresh rate. So you've probably gone through and on your computer every now and then kind of gone and done some kind of messing around with it, and you've seen this thing called the refresh rate. It's really how often the computer is drawing the contents of the frame buffer on the actual screen. So if we want to go through and actually kind of control what we see on the screen, well, we've got to kind of dig down and figure out how computers do this. So kind of one typical way, especially in event-driven drawing, is that the application, each application or screen will have kind of registered with it a special function called a draw handler. So many applications will register a special function called a draw handler. Now, when it's time to update kind of the appearance of that applications on the computer screen, what happens is the application will call the draw handler, and the draw handler will then update the contents of the frame buffer. Then when the monitor redraws the screen, it'll take that updated contents, and actually you'll see some change on the screen. So the critical thing in this kind of event-driven approach is that we have a special function that takes care of drawing, and then that function is called, and it might be called very frequently, it might be called very infrequently, depending on how often kind of the contents of our application actually change. In CodeSculptor, we're going to register the draw handler using a simple GUI command that we'll learn. And then once we've registered it, CodeSculptor calls the draw handler at around 60 times per second. Now, what does this draw handler do? What the draw handler does is the draw handler then updates the canvas. That's where all of our drawing is going to take place in CodeSculptor, using a collection of draw commands that include things like draw text or draw line or something like draw circle. Okay, so let's go on and talk about that. Before we do an example inside CodeSculptor of drawing on the canvas, let's go through and talk a little bit about how we actually tell the computer where to draw things on the canvas. So to do that, we're going to talk about canvas coordinates. So here you can see I've drawn a big rectangle. This is kind of the canvas that you would see where you're going to do your drawing. And this was created by a call to Simple GUI called Simple GUI Create Frame. And so remember, the frame includes lots of things. The canvas is the portion on the right-hand side. And you specified a width and a height for that canvas. So the width was kind of the horizontal size in pixel, and the height was the vertical size in pixels. So the kind of most critical thing you're going to do is you're going to need to specify a position on the canvas for where to do some drawing. So let's put a little dot where we want to do some drawing here. So let's say we want to do it there. And we need to give it a position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify it as a pair of numbers x and y. And I put them between square brackets. This is going to be Python list here, but just for now, just assume I always kind of put my numbers together with square brackets around them. And I'd like to specify that position on the canvas. So we're going to use Cartesian coordinates. The numbers x and y are going to represent two things. They're going to represent the horizontal displacement and the vertical displacement. So we have to figure out the displacement from where. So one of the critical things to remember here is that we're working both on the canvas and in frames. The origin is always in the upper left. And that comes from the fact that kind of TVs, when they're first built, scanned from left to right and then top to bottom. So it doesn't work the same way you saw kind of in high school geometry where the origin was always in the lower left. The origin for our canvas is always going to be in the upper left. You'll see this in all kind of GUI systems. Okay, so how can we specify then a position XY? Well, it's pretty easy. We start from the origin. And for the first coordinate x, we go over x pixels. And then for the y coordinate, we go down. How much do we go down? We go down y pixels. So that then specifies a position on the canvas that we can then do drawing operations on. So let's go do an example in CodeSculptor. So let's do an example of drawing on the canvas in CodeSculptor. So here I've got a tab pulled up. I have a set of comments that kind of describe what I need to do. I've started off imported Simple GUI. Really kind of 4 steps. I have to define a draw handler. I have to create a frame. I should register the draw handler. And then I need to start the frame. Now we already know how to do 2 of those, so let's go ahead and fill that in real quick. We've created a frame last week. I could say frame equal simple GUI.create frame. Let's call it maybe test. And we'll give it, let's say the width will be 300 pixels and its height will be 200 pixels. And then to get that frame to pop up, we're going to need to say frame.start here. Just run that and make sure we did that right. And so what did I do? I forgot to put a double quote there. Let's run it again. Okay, good thing I tested that first before I started adding new stuff in. I have the canvas here. It's a 300 by 200 kind of black rectangle. So now let's draw some stuff inside it. So to do that, I'm going to need to go over and figure out how to work with the canvas. And luckily the docs have some examples. So here we are, the canvas. There are going to be 2 things we're going to need to do. We're going to need to register the draw handler, and then we're going to need to make calls that use the canvas to kind of draw. Let's look at the register, because how we register, because I think there's something interesting you'll see here. So when we register the draw handler, we give it, it's use set draw handler, that's fine. We give it the name of the draw handler. But notice what the structure of the draw handler should look like. Remember how for input fields, we passed the text as a parameter into the event handler for the input field? Well, here we're going to get past the canvas as a parameter into the draw handler. So now all the operations can actually, that we used to draw on the canvas, can actually access the canvas. Let's see, so what the heck? Let's go down and look at one more. Let's look at how we draw some text. So we give it the canvas, we use the draw text method, we give it the text, we give it a position on the canvas, we give a font size, we give a color.
So I think we've got enough to go and do things. So let's go try and do that. So I'm going to go through and say, I'll just call my draw handler draw. Takes the canvas as input, and we're going to go through and say canvas.draw text, and we'll be very friendly and say hello. And let's see, what are we going to put it? Let's put it 100, 100, and we'll do a font size will be 24, and we're going to need to give a color. So you can specify colors as HTML5 color strings. What that really means is just make a string with the color, name of the color in it. So let's do white. And we need to register the draw handler. So I go down here and I say frame.set draw handler. I'll give it draw. I think that's good enough. Let's run it and see what happens. Very nice. So we now have our canvas has the word hello printed inside of it. I want to point out one thing here. This value 100, 100 here was interesting. That was a position on the canvas. It's a position where this string was drawn. Now you might ask one kind of interesting question. What was this position 100, 100 relative to where this string was drawn? So we could look in the docs, but let's just do something else instead. Let's go through and just draw a little tiny circle wherever 100, 100 is. And that'll give us a way to kind of see what the position is relative to where the string was drawn. So let's say canvas.draw circle, and we'll give it that position 100, 100. Let's give it a radius, make it really a small radius, and kind of the width of the circle is going to be very small, and let's make it, oh, what the heck, let's make it red. And let's just fire that up and see what happens. So here you can see the result. So 100, 100 is right where this red circle is drawn. So it's the lower left-hand portion of the string. And that comes because we kind of always line strings up on the bottom of the page or on the line. So we're going to specify the position for a string here in terms of kind of the lower left position of where we want the string drawn on the canvas. So that's enough to kind of get you started. Scott's going to talk a little bit about doing some string processing because that'll be an important part of your week 3 mini project. And then I'll come back and I'll do another longer example of how to actually draw on the canvas. I'll see you in a sec.